43. Ben Franklin. Some people had problems with Benjamin Franklin. They accused him of not having any gravity. Now, that doesn't mean he floated around like a weightless space voyager. Gravity has another meaning, as in grave. No, not a place where you get buried, but you're getting warmer. Someone who is grave is very serious, maybe a bit dull, and certainly not much fun. Ben Franklin did have a problem. He just couldn't stay serious or dull. He was always playing jokes or having fun. The French had no trouble with Ben. They loved his jokes and admired his good mind. They were amazed by all the things he had done. He was a scientist, an inventor, a writer, and a great patriotic American. His mind never seemed to stop for rest. Daylight savings time was his idea, and he invented bifocal glasses, the lightning rod, the one-armed desk chair, and an efficient stove. He found the first public library, the first city hospital, and the University of Pennsylvania. He was the most famous journalist of his time and the first editor to use cartoons as illustrators. He made electricity into a science, and that is only part of what he did. Benjamin Franklin helped with the ideas that made this country special, and he got the French to help pay for the revolution that made us free. But as I said, some people had problems with Franklin. The English people didn't much like him. Well, that's not quite true. It was English politicians who didn't like him, especially when the colonies began to object to the way England was treating him. When Ben was sent to London to represent the Americans, one Englishman wrote, "I look upon him as a dangerous engine." And Lord Sandwich, that really was his name, called him one of the most mischievous enemies that England ever knew. By the way, sandwichers were named for Lord Sandwich, whose real name was John Montagu. He liked his servants to fix him a snack, meat between bread, when he played cards. Oh, look at that. We have Benjamin Franklin is credited with there's his bifocals. And Franklin, who became the most famous journalist of his time, was an innovator in printing newspapers, an almanac, illustrated stories, and political cartoons. Some Americans accused Franklin of liking the English too much. The English, of course, said he didn't like them at all. What Ben was doing was trying to be fair and also trying to prevent war. He said, "There never was a good war or a bad peace." I think you would have liked him. If you want to have a real hero, someone to use as a guide for ordering your life, you can't do better than Benjamin Franklin. He had what has been called a happy balance of earnestness and humor. He made the most of what he had. One of his biographers wrote, "He had a talent for happiness." Another said, "He hated solemn, pompous people. He gave away much of his money. He set about improving himself." But you need to know something of his life, so you can judge the man yourself. Franklin was born in Boston on January 17, 1706, and died on April 17, 1790. His life spanned the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin was the 15th child in a family of 17 children. That's a lot of kids. But he was the youngest son of the youngest son of the youngest son, back to his great-great-grandfather. His father was hardworking candle maker descended from Puritan stock. Young Franklin went to school for 3 years, and then his parents could afford no more. It was enough to get him started. He loved books and reading, and he educated himself. One thing he didn't like was candle making. So his father signed him as an apprentice to Ben's older half-brother James, who was a printer. In return for room and board, food, and training, an apprentice had to work for a certain number of years. He was not free to quit. It was something like being an indentured servant. Ben was 12 years old, and his father signed him for 9 years. He didn't get along with his brother, and what he really wanted to do was go to sea, but he made the best of a bad situation. The print shop was a good place to learn. There were stacks of books. He read them all. And interesting people dropped by. Some wrote for the newspaper James printed and owned. Ben wanted to write for the paper, but he knew James wouldn't publish his work. So he wrote letters to the editor and signed them with the made-up name of a woman. He called her Silence Dogood. The letters were a big hit. Silence wrote that she was naturally very jealous for the rights and liberties of my country, and the least appearance of an encroachment on those invaluable privileges is apt to make my blood boil exceedingly. Here we have Franklin learning to be a printer as an apprentice to his brother, a printer in Boston. Encroachment, which we spell encroachment, means taking another's possessions gradually or slyly. So you take something very sneaky. Usually the word is used to describe the illegal taking of somebody's land. He encroached on his neighbor's property, for example. When Dogood wrote a description of herself, it could have been a description of Franklin. I never intend to wrap my talent in a napkin, she wrote. To be brief, I am courteous and affable, good-humored, unless I am first provoked, handsome, and sometimes witty. Everyone wanted to know who Silas Dogood was. When Ben's brother found out, he stopped printing the letters. Ben wasn't happy, but he didn't sit around and mope. One thing Benjamin Franklin did all his life was try and find ways to improve himself. Maybe it was his Puritan background that made him industrious. He decided he wanted to be a writer. Ben had learned to spell at the printing house, but his father told him that style of his writing was not good. So he found a friend and they wrote letters back and forth. Then he worked out exercises to improve his writing style. Sometimes he turned stories into poems, then back again into prose. It was a fine way to learn to work with words. When Ben was 16, he read about a vegetable diet. He became a vegetarian and bought books with the money he saved by not eating meat. Soon he could talk about books with anyone. He was becoming very well educated. But he still had problems with his brother. Perhaps I was too saucy and provoking, said Ben. My brother was passionate and had often beaten me, which I took extremely amiss. Finally, at 17, Ben ran away from Boston. He sold his books and used the money to get to Philadelphia. In his autobiography, Franklin described his arrival in that city. I was dirty from my journey. My pockets were stuffed out with shirts and stockings. I knew no soul nor where to look for lodging. I was fatigued with traveling, rowing, and want of rest. I was very hungry, and my whole stock of cash consisted of a Dutch dollar and about a shilling in copper. Prose is plain language not arranged as verse, and saucy means fresh. Here we have Franklin leaving Boston at 17, making his way to Philadelphia. And we have a picture of the Poor Richard Almanac. If you had not be forgotten as soon as you are dead and rotten, either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing. Said by Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin soon had a job working for a printer. Then he got a chance to go to London, where he learned a lot. When he returned to Philadelphia, he opened a print shop. Soon he began publishing his own newspaper. He became the best printer in Philadelphia. Because he was so good, he printed all the official papers for the colony of Pennsylvania. Then he decided to publish an almanac. In the 17th century, almost every colonial home had two books. One was a Bible, the other was an almanac. The almanac was very useful. It had a calendar. It predicted the weather. It told when the moon would be full and when it would be a sliver. It told about the ocean's tides, and it was filled with odds and ends of information. Ben Franklin, with his curiosity, had a head filled with interesting information. His almanac, called Poor Richard's Almanac, became very popular. Poor Richard was also always giving advice. He said things like, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. God helps them who helps themselves. And 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead." The almanac made Benjamin Franklin rich. He decided to retire at age 42 and spend the rest of his life doing all the things he wanted to do. He studied electricity, invented things, became a politician, and was soon Philadelphia's most famous citizen. He would help found a new nation. By his example, he showed that in America, a poor boy could become the equal of anyone in the world. End of chapter.